Hello, thank you for joining Workshop 5 of The Black Family, United by History, Restored by Storytelling, brought to you by New York Life, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, in collaboration with Archival Alchemy, presents this national program that highlights the legacy of Black family reunions while encouraging families of all backgrounds to build and renew their own familial traditions and stories. We encourage you to watch the rest of the videos in this series to learn more about oral storytelling, genealogy, and familial archiving. Once you view all of the videos, you could receive a certificate as a family historian from the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. Be sure to subscribe to ASALH TV, ASALH's YouTube channel, and check out the YouTube description as well as the website for more information on this project. And now, let's get into Workshop 5, Preserving Family History, led by Skyla S. Hearn. Skyla is an archivist, special collections librarian, visual artist, and co-founder of the Blackivists, a collective of trained Black archivists who prioritize Black cultural heritage, preservation, and memory work. To learn more about Skyla and her work, please read her full bio in the YouTube description.
Hello, welcome to the Black Family United by History, Restored by Storytelling virtual program presented by the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, ASALH, celebrating the 2021 Black History theme, The Black Family, Representation, Identity, and Diversity. I am Skyla Hearn, co-founder of the Blackivists and manager of archives for Cook County government. I will be facilitating a discussion on preserving family history, focusing on the process of preserving family documents, photographs, and ephemera, or sacred rare objects. Thank you to the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, the Black Family Project, the Archival Alchemy team, and New York Life, our sponsor, for the invitation to participate in this important and momentous program, and for coordinating this experience for our people and culture. I am honored to be here with you to share information about how to develop personal or family and community archives, and ultimately, how to preserve your family's legacy. As a Black archivist, I am constantly thinking about strategies, ways of how to save everything of importance to our history and culture, all while educating ourselves in the world about our contributions to create a more equitable, just, and loving world to exist and thrive in. One way of doing this is through sharing our stories, which include rich histories, some triumphant, some challenging. No matter the good or bad, the information serves as evidence of our existence. Who are you? Where are your people from? These are questions elders ask when they encounter people they usually don't know. Today, I'm meeting a lot of you for the first time, so I'd like to introduce myself to you, if I may. My people are from Oakland, Mississippi, primarily Oakland and Clarksville, Mississippi, Memphis, Tennessee, and some parts of the Carolinas, both north and south. My parents grew up as children in Mississippi, then later together as young adults in Chicago. My closest family ties are to my maternal family. My father passed away before I made an entry into this world. He was an only child raised by his great aunts and mother, had a couple of uncles in Chicago and some cousins, all of whom I knew and had close ties to at one point before they all passed away. I'm fortunate to still have close ties to my maternal family, including my grandmother, who is 95 years young. My legacy includes the Great Migration, like many of you. So, where are your people from? What are their stories? Our personal photos, papers, and other cherished materials are extremely important to us. They connect us to our relations, to our past, and record the details of our lives that help give us meaning. How do we safeguard or take care of these cherished items? How do we share them with our children and future generations? How do we ensure that the stories are preserved and passed down and around to family members? Let's talk about the materials in your possession and in other family members' possession, and not to be possessive. Let's develop some steps to documenting, storing, preserving, and managing your cherished materials. So, ain't nothing to it but to do it. An archivist's DIY guide to family, personal, and community archiving. So I just shared a little bit with you about who I am, about my background, and I really wanted to draw it in. I love to share images. I love to share photos. And also, this is an object or items that most of us have in our own possession. Even if we no longer have physical photographs, we still have the images that we create through other means. So we have images that may be stored on cameras. We have images that are stored in our cell phones. And so, as I mentioned to you before, my parents pretty much knew each other their whole lives. And so, these are images of them. This is Retha and this is Joe. And next to them is the house that Retha and Joe built. And the interesting thing about this house in particular is that, it served as a social services organization prior to my parents buying the house and, starting their lives there. So these are things that, in later conversations to think about in terms of the cherished items in your possession and the history that those particular items hold, including the spaces that we inhabit. So including our homes, or in some cases, the cars we drive, but just thinking about drawing on the historical context to everything that we surround ourselves with, including our bodies and our memories as well. So where are your people from? Again, just in terms of my background, this little girl in the front is not me. However, it could have been. This is the elementary school that I attended here in Chicago called Holy Angels, which no longer functions in the way that it did back in the 80s when I was in elementary school. But even still, this image, which is from the Smithsonian archives, for me, fully encompasses that childhood, as well as the uniforms that we used to wear, which the latest iteration of Holy Angels, those kids don't have to do that. But, what's in your collection that tells the stories that you want to share, and also tells the stories of your community, tells the stories of your families, in addition to your own individual or personal stories. And so I want to use one of the first examples that I pulled for you to share is one of my grandmother's photo albums. And we all call my grandmother, or all of her grandchildren call her Mama. So Mama's photo albums. And so, how evidence of me becomes evidence of us. And that me that I think about in this particular case definitely is my grandmother. Because all throughout my life, she would collect all of the family, and my grandmother really is the nucleus of our family. I mentioned, that she's 95 years old, but she knows everyone's birthday and, and this is across the whole entire family. As and as well as friends and adopted family members, we all have play cousins, play aunts, etc. But she's still in close contact with everyone across the country. And she would, as a child, I remember her, affixing the photographs to her, to her albums. And so, over the years, lots of use, this is what happens. Like, how many of your family photographs or photo albums, or scrapbooks look like this, or books, things of that nature. And we're going to get into, how to preserve them as is, because I know in some cases, some folks may think, oh, I'll just pull them off the page. But, back then, I think anyway, I know definitely with all of my grandmother's photo albums, the sheets were adhesive. So if you pull them off the page, then you risk, possibly ripping the photo, which we don't want to do. And so, there are options here, and I'll cover some of the options. Of course, I'm not going to be able to cover everything. But again, these are the intro steps to get you started to thinking about, if you haven't already, developing or creating your own archive, or preserving the materials that you have. And it's also, I'm here to talk to you about like supporting you in your efforts if you've already started these processes. And so just think of it in terms of, some valuable steps, so I'm here to support and or encourage. And, so if we look at this image of Mama's photo album, you see that it's completely coming apart. And with the book itself, it's completely deteriorating. And this is really what the book looks like. And I've given it back to her, so I can't actually show you the physical book right now. But before doing so, I was able to scan each page and then isolate, or, what I mean by that is scan each individual image. And as much as possible, talking to my grandmother and other family members, learning about who some of the people in the photographs are that I may not know. One of the benefits, to my life, and I have many, I'm really blessed, is that I grew up with my grandmother. So I also grew up with a connection to my family, and knowing who people were, and just knowing my people. But like I said, in those cases where I didn't know who they were, or maybe she didn't know who they were, we talked to other people, and I'll get into that a little bit later. So, with this particular photo album, just really quickly here, one thing that you can do, as I mentioned, is if you have the capability to scan the images and then, crop. And what I mean by isolate really is just crop each individual image and then name it. Which of course this can happen physically. You can have a notebook and list them all and name them, or electronically. So creating some as easy as an Excel spreadsheet to list the who, what, where, when, and possibly by whom, if you know who the photographer is in these cases. And these are all things that you don't need to do alone. And these are just two examples. Another, of course, is if you have a cell phone, then you can capture the image with your cell phone and then name it and create an album, and then transfer that album to a computer. So just, 3 examples there. Trust me, there are many more. And the image to the bottom shows you kind of like what the next steps would be. So if we were able to preserve and think about, say like your whole family collections of photographs. So if you just put out a call and asked your family, in preparation, say for a family reunion, like, everyone, bring me your photographs. And then like you didn't even maybe realize what you were doing in that ask, but then the family, shows up and shows out. And before you know it, you have like 1,000 photographs from, multiple generations of your family. And then what do you do? And so this picture at the bottom kind of provides an example of what that may even look like. So if you have a space, designated space, if you can. That isn't always possible. You may not always have a table, but I really think about meeting people where they are. So, create a space, even if it's on the floor, but, lay out a sheet, ensure that the space is clean, whether it's the table, the floor, because we want to protect these very cherished materials. We want to protect them. They're important to us. And then think about ways in which you can categorize them and then labeling them. And so I just want to, point this out. I know that you see Post-its on these photographs, but the papers that are laying on top of the photographs, directly do not have adhesive backings, and it was just temporary as I was labeling through the photographs. We never want to put the adhesive, like, posted here, but you never want to put the adhesive directly onto any historic document. So a photograph, a paper, but you can affix it to the back temporarily while you're in the process of labeling. So I'm just going to move on and share a little bit more. So in these photographs, the top photo is my grandmother, who I'm standing in front of, next to her younger sister, and then her other sister with her husband. And to the right of that photograph is my aunt Alberta, my grandmother's oldest daughter, who has passed on, physically no longer with us, but in spirit still very strong. And to the bottom is my grandmother and her 4 children. And, again, my aunt to the left, my Aunt Alberta, my Uncle James, my grandmother, my Uncle George, my mother, Retha, and then the top of my head. But, just pulling in these family ties, and, thinking about the importance of labeling who the people are. I just walked through with you who everyone here is, but if someone else in the family were to then inherit a box of photographs and there's no information, then what context would they be able to draw? What connection would they be able to have other than that these are family members? So it's important that when we document, we provide as much information as possible so that we're then able to continue to keep these stories and these people, vibrant and alive through spirit, especially, when they're physically no longer with us. So that was just a little bit of talk about photographs. I'm going to round back and talk a little bit more in detail about the actual preservation processes and practices related to preserving these different formats or different objects that I'm sharing this morning. Because I do honestly feel that the majority of us, especially collectively, have these things within our possession. So the next are ephemeral objects. So like rare objects, ephemeral materials usually speak to what happened at a particular time in history and in a particular place. And they usually no longer exist, or at least not in the form that they're in. And so this particular image here, and I wanted to keep it in terms of the full story here. So, I never even thought about it or thought that I was creating an altar. My daughter came into my office and she was really touched by what she saw. In that, her interpretation was that I created, this homage to my elders, to my father, which in a way it really is, but I didn't consciously do it. But in particular, the reason that I'm sharing this with you is because if you look at this particular drawing of my father, which was drawn in 1972, you can see that it has deteriorated over the years. You can also see that I am not keeping it in the best environmental conditions that I could possibly keep it in. And I'm here, to talk as, I do walk the walk, but then in some cases I don't, and I look at this or I hold this particular object in my possession as one that I cherish. And so you probably think, well, then why don't you do a better job of, preserving it? And for whatever reason, maybe cognitive dissonance or like the not connecting that, this is something that I would consider to be ephemeral in someone else's collection is ephemeral and precious and valuable in my own collection. And so to address that question, one thing in particular that we could do, which I, mentioned before, is of course taking a photo of the drawing itself. and reproducing that photo and then framing the photo and then putting the original away in better environmentally sound conditions to preserve it longer. And there are a few different ways that you can do that. One, of course, is getting archival supplies. So there is archival tissue paper, and by archival, I mean that it's acid free. So it slows down the deterioration. So it slows down, the destruction of the chemical or makeup of, the particular object. And so this, for the most part, what we have here is paper, which we all know is tree-based. It's natural, cardboard and wood. And, cardboard has plant particles. This wood, again, sourced from nature, from life, from a tree. And so instead of me trying to pull the drawing away from the frame and everything, I would just have the whole entire drawing itself framed and then put away. So stored, we can do something, again, thinking about meeting the need and where we are. So if you have the resources to purchase archival supplies, then you can do so, wrapping it in archival tissue paper and then placing it inside of an acid-free box, which I will get to a little bit later. I have examples of a lot of these things that I'm discussing with you. And that's just the picture, the drawing again. But here you can see more detailing in terms of the, the deterioration that's taking place. And so again, the first thing to do would be to remove it from the current environment and, put it into archivally sound materials and then store it away in a safer environment. And if you're in your home, one of the safest environments, believe it or not, is oftentimes a closet that is away from a heater or, a water system. And it's dry, light tight. And a lot of the times, the dust the dust collection is much lower than other parts of the house. The places that we typically, stay away from are the basement, the garage, the attic, unless they've been remodeled and updated recently. So like within the last 10 years or so. And again, this is another conversation, or this adds to the conversation a little bit later. And, and so here, these are some other things that are currently in my possession, and, just thinking about bringing different examples to you about things that you can preserve in your collection. These are not yet at a point where I would consider them to be archival materials, but just thinking in terms of things that we do have that are similar. So, postcards that you could have received 20, 30 years ago, or your grandmother, or, your grandmother's mother that you may be in possession of. And as you can see here, they're encapsulated or enclosed in more archival supplies, the three in the back, and as well as the one here to the left. So just a visual example of ways that, we can protect these particular items. So I so far shared a bit, and maybe it has sounded a little daunting to think about, receiving 1,000 photographs from family in preparation for a family reunion. And, initially it could be, but, think about it in terms of being organized. And also think about the fact that you're not in it alone. You don't have to do it by yourself. Pull in your community, again, you're not alone. Work with others. Who in your community is interested? Who in your family is also interested in upholding your family's legacy, interested in preserving? Who are the folks who, get excited about labeling things and talking to other people and figuring out who is where, or like who the people are. So pull in those folks, because, initially that energy will take you so far. And then they'll spread the word, the seed gets planted, and then other people come and join in. And before you know it, you have a whole team that is supporting you in preserving these important and valuable materials. So these are just some examples. In the top corner are my cousins and myself with our grandmother. Well, my cousin down in the corner with the hat on, this is his great aunt. So, but still, for him, he calls her T, and for us, she's Mama. But, we have her. And as I mentioned before, she's the nucleus of our family. And, the reason in particular that I show this image is because when I was thinking about, this talk with you all, this presentation, I also thought about what I just shared with you, who the other people are in the family who feel and believe that, preserving family legacy is extremely important. And so my cousin down in the corner, Jawan, is one of those folks. And so Jawan represents another group of our family, and he has been working with the elders to gather their photo albums and to digitize them, label them, or arrange and describe, as we say in the archives, all of the people in those photo albums so that he can then share them out with other family members. And so he and I have been talking a lot about this because, well, me being an archivist and he being an information technology person, professional, we have been discussing ways to share information and also ways to get our other family members who have like the skill set, the interest, the drive to be a part of the project, which is, digitizing these photo albums. And so far, he's amassed like close to 50 photo albums. Can you all believe that? From different family members. And the other part to that is, like our families trust us. They trust us with these materials. I'm going to share some things with you in a little bit as well. But, and so when you think about, being the caretaker, we have to do it to the best of our abilities when these things are in our possessions, when our family has entrusted us with them as well. And just, carrying that ideology as a practice, in terms of the importance of being able to have these materials so that, other generations can physically touch them as well. Because there's something about the experience of being able to physically hold something versus just being able to view it. And so down at the bottom, as well as a group of students that I worked with on a particular project, and, talking to them about a very similar subject, which is, like local community as well as family history. So, passing the word on, sharing with, again, our future generations, our youth, about the importance of preservation. And a lot of them wanted to start projects very similar to our family projects as well. And then in some cases, we can pull together, it becomes this intergenerational commitment and pride that we share. Oh, and the top corner too is, in terms of community, think about the people who So like your local librarian, or in the library, if there's a special collections, who's running that department? More than likely, they are archivists like myself. Reach out to them, talk to them, get advice. In terms of thinking about, again, best ways to preserve materials, like what are some of the supplies that they use at their institutions. But I'm going to cover that as well in just a few minutes. And so thinking about how do we get the evidence of me or the evidence of me that becomes the evidence of us into a place where we're then able to access those materials, provide access to those materials, and preserve them. And so not just in the physical space, right? Like these, of course, are examples of what preservation in the physical space look like, but also continue to think about, in addition to or coupled with taking care of these things in the physical space, what that also looks like in a virtual space. So what type of database or what type of tools would you use? And as I mentioned before, Excel is a great place to start. Word documents, just typing things up, and creating a summary of what may be in a particular box, or even like handwriting, what may be in a particular box or whatever have you. Handwriting with pencil, of course, and then adding that sheet into the box. And so some of these are what I would like to draw in here and talk with you about is sometimes the picture with the boxes and the bags, sometimes that's what things look like when people bring them to us in families, community organizations, sometimes our own personal stuff. Who knows? We move and sometimes we just use what we have. And we may throw a lot of things in bags with the intention of removing them from bags or just into boxes and have a vague idea of what's in that box, But when you have time, and then sometimes if you can just cut through it a little bit quicker, and as you're putting things away, keep in mind what it is that is going into that box or going into that bag, and then writing yourself up a super quick label and putting it in the bag or the box to, of course, like remind you a little bit later on. But then in this other photograph, these boxes were meant for, roving or moving things around. And of course, in this particular photograph, you see light onto the boxes. This was just a very temporary stage, meaning that, in this particular moment, I was adding folders to these boxes, and then they were later moved the same day, later moved into a more environmentally sound. So what that means is moved into a climate that was, a climate for archives, which is for us, our bodies, relatively cold. So, less than 70 degrees, and thinking about, so roughly 68 degrees, and, thinking about the relative humidity, because you want the humidity, the temperature at a particular level, so that these materials pretty much do not deteriorate. Because remember, a lot of the things that we have that are created are from, for the most part, organic materials, trees, and they do and will deteriorate due to just a change in climate and conditions. So heat, extreme humidity or extreme heat, light, things of that nature. But again, thinking about, meeting the need where it is. And in this particular case, like I said, these particular things were meant to move from one space to another. When they arrived in their permanent location, they were then transferred into acid-free boxes and acid-free folders. And these, plastic storage boxes were used for, other things. And then, so I mentioned before about, the documentation to support your archives or to support your materials. This is just an example of a finding aid. So in our profession, we create documentation, again, to support the physical objects that we're preserving, managing, activating. And this is an example of a finding aid, which is actually found at the Harsh Research Collection here in Chicago at the Carter G. Woodson Library. And this is one of my absolute favorite collections that is housed there. But the information that it gives you is the same information that you will be able to use with your own materials. So, what is the date span that's covered in these photographs? As much as you know, anyway. Document that information. The size of it. How many boxes do you have or bags do you have? Where is it held exactly? Is it like which family member's home is it? Is it at Skyla Hearn's house? Where is it? And then where is it at Skyla's house? Is it in her newly remodeled basement that has a collection storage room and archivally sound conditions, or is it still in the basement on the top shelf of on the top shelf of a rack that you purchased to keep it off of the floor? Be specific about where the things are. And then it gives all of this other information, which you may or not, decide to use or not. And it's always good to know where things came from, or, who created the collection. So again, if you are creating, like a family photo album, in a sense, for everyone to share from all of the collected photographs that you received from folks, then note what the purpose of it is for, and note who pulled all of the things together. So that would be the processed by. But some of these other fields here may or may not apply, depending on what type of collection it is that you are processing. So if you are working with the community, all of this information may exist. But if you're working on your personal family photographs, you may not need to use all of these. And so, when you begin to break it down, or, discuss the materials specifically per container, and by container, I just mean box or folder, wherever it is that you're storing these things, again, documentation is key. Documentation is everything, because it's going to provide for us all of the information, all of the context that we need, the who, what, where, when, possibly, by whom. And so, as you can see, these particular fields are sharing and telling you all of or answering those questions that I just posed. And so this particular, collection, which is an exhibition, was actually created in a tool called Omeka, or Omeka, some folks say, which, the tool itself is free. There's no fee for it. But, as we know, like, nothing is free. So, I mean, you do have to commit to learning how to use the tool, or leading someone else to learn how to use the tool in order to add your family's, say, photographs, for example, into this particular software, which can then be shared with everyone. And so these are just some examples, just walking you through ways in which you can begin to, as I mentioned before, think about or implement your own family or personal or community archives. And again, my grandmother being the nucleus, all things stem from her. And these are just some images with, some of, us and her. And this is how I would like to conclude this portion of my presentation. And so now I'm going to stop sharing the screen and draw it into some actual physical objects that I have here in my home, in my possession, which I am in the process of preserving. Okay, so in addition, I do want to mention this briefly. In addition to this presentation, I have also created a guide which you will receive, which, is just in support of the presentation, as well as gives you some hands-on, or gives you some direct information to support you in your efforts to create an archive. So it is, hopefully it'll be helpful. So I developed this guide with two main thoughts in mind. To co-pilot, as I mentioned earlier, those who have begun the process to create an archive, and to introduce the idea of creating an archive that is supported by preservation practices in a feasible, practical, and manageable process that can be maintained by anyone interested in protecting materials sacred to them and to the people who matter the most no matter their background or exposure to our wonderful world of archives. My hopes are that this will be useful information to support you along your journey to preserving rich, important, and valuable historical contributions. So very quickly, the areas that are covered in this particular guide are establishing and organizing your archive. So thinking about, what materials you want to work with, where they'll live, or where you'll store them, how you'll store them, and how you will document or describe those materials. And then later on, how you will be able to access them or provide access to them to other people. Will it be through electronic means, through like a cloud storage, like Dropbox, or will you store them all into a USB, a hard drive, and then share them out? So thinking about that in the physical locations that you will want to store them in. So, and then the next is making space. So what would it mean to create the space in order to have these materials be safely cared for? The next area is creating the archive location. And so, just to, again, thinking about the space, and then thinking about the location, and then digitizing. There's a whole conversation out there, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of, and then if you haven't, the whole idea of digitizing. And a lot of folks are of the mind that everything should be digitized. And well, the truth of the matter is that everything should not be digitized. And the truth of the matter too is that everything cannot be saved. We think about the most important things that we can save, we think, or preserve, manage and take care of into the future. We have to think in terms of what's manageable. What do people have the capacity to do? What do you have the capacity to do? Could you describe or document 1,000 photographs, or would you then just work or look through the photographs and choose the best 100 that best represent your family for the family reunion? Drawing back on that example. So thinking in terms of that. And then also, when you digitize things, you're creating a whole different, or you're creating a new version of something. So, thinking about how those materials will transfer. And you have to use tools that you will be able to transfer, those materials onto or with, and thinking about the long-term use of those things. So if you were to use like a cloud tool, such as Dropbox, think in terms of how long will it be, or how long will it last, or or what we like to say is the obsolescence. Like, think in terms of when something may possibly become obsolete. Like, one example is Kodak EasyShare. Like, who still uses Kodak EasyShare? If we were all in the room together, I think everyone would be looking around to see who's raising their hand. And, the answer would be that no one would be raising their hand, because Kodak EasyShare is obsolete. It no longer is in use at all. And so, thinking about things like that. And also, if you were to use a cloud storage, then what would your backup be? Would you also have it stored in an Excel, or, in addition to, the space where everyone can kind of sign in and add information or accept or access, the information or the images themselves. So thinking in terms of all of that. So that's digitizing. And then legal ownership of the archives. Think about, some of the things that are in your possession, and who do they belong to? And these are things that I cover a little bit more, more in explanation. And then the archival description, which I shared, which was an example of that, was the finding aid. And then, thinking in terms also of access, if at any point would you think about exhibiting some of these objects, and then how? Would you do it in a physical space, or would you create like a digital exhibition? And again, I mentioned Omeka as a tool. And Omeka is a really good tool in that you can store information there as well as create digital exhibitions. So again, you will be receiving a copy of this guide, which talks more in detail about that. But for now, I would like to just show you some things and talk a little bit more about preservation. And, so the other day I was on the phone with my grandmother, and before I realized it, my grandmother's a conversationalist. That's where I honestly think that I get it from, because we can talk. Uh, and, before I knew it, she was just going down our family line, and I began asking her questions that I don't think I ever thought to ask her before. And I was able to like craft a family tree, and took up, the front and back of a piece of paper, because I was just handwriting, right? Scribbling everything down. And that's the other thing in terms of thinking about tools. Ancestry.com is a really good place to start if you want to have a tool that supports or helps you to build out your family tree. A good friend of mine recently recommended that I use that tool, which of course I know about it, but I hadn't thought about, personally using that particular tool to help me map out my family relationship. So that's just, but going back to the conversation, I thought to myself, I really need to sit with her and record her. And that's something that I didn't talk about in the presentation is, conversations or oral histories. We have cell phones, pick up that phone and, press record, or pick up that phone and take a photo. I don't, in regards to capturing information, there's really no wrong way to do it. And so, if you're in the moment and you're having a conversation, ask the person, gain their permission, and then hopefully permission granted, begin to record that conversation. And then, of course, it's stored onto your phone, transferred into another space. So onto your computer, perhaps, and then maybe into a cloud tool so that you can then share it with other people, or onto, a USB or a hard drive that, you can then transfer elsewhere, share with other people. They can download that information, and so, just going back to the very first object that, we talked about, which were photographs. And so again, in the guide, I provide very specific examples of, materials and things that you can use to store your objects. And so with photographs, for example, as I mentioned before, it is important to use acid-free, airtight supplies that block light and protect against fluctuating temperatures. And so in particular, I've heard, and I've used it myself, because here you may not be able to read the book itself, but what you can see is that I do actually have a book inside of a Ziploc bag. Is this good for long-term storage? No, it is not. And I will not store this long-term. But again, I want to share with you some of the things that I do as well. But, as a professional, I can then, help to move from like meeting the need where it is, or this temporary space, into a permanent long-term space. And so something that, so if we were to start again, because I thought about it, I just touched this, although it is in a Ziploc bag, but I did touch it. Prior to beginning this presentation, I washed my hands. There's no lotion, oil, or anything on my hands. They're quite dry. And so, thinking in terms of like your basic supplies to just get you started. Most of us don't start with acid-free boxes and, polyethylene, polypropylene jackets and you know, storage supplies at home. Most of us just start with what it is that we have. So if you have a book, or if you're given a book, say by someone, and when they give it to you, it's falling apart, you know, you have these things typically at your fingertips that you can just quickly, you know, provide some form of preservation care to. So I just want to go back, you know, to our basic supplies, like we're at home, right? So basic supplies: paper, pencil, cell phone, computer, boxes with lids if we have them. Most of us have shoe boxes. That's a box with a lid. Clean hands, as I mentioned, or nitrile gloves, which are just, you know, the very tight fitting plastic gloves. And, you know, we're in COVID, like we're still in a pandemic. So some of us may still have, you know, some of those supplies from, you know, when we first went into the pandemic. I don't know, but if some of you are like me, we had it all. We had wipes, hand sanitizer, gloves, masks. We had it all. So, you know, those nitrile, as I mentioned, gloves or lint-free gloves, which, you know, again, most of us don't really have in our possession, but as an archivist, I do. I have them. So, you know, and they may look a little grimy, but trust me, they're clean. So I have clean hands. I have my clean gloves, lint-free. And this is, again, probably what you would see if you were to go into an archive and an archivist were to come out with the box and the folders and whatnot. A lot of the times we have gloves that look like this. So, you know, again, with my gloves, and I wanted to pull this book out for you because, again, we receive things in all different kinds of conditions. And as you can see, this book is, you know, it's deteriorating. It's completely falling apart. But this is a rare book, which is now in my possession. And I pulled it out to share with you. And this is one of the very first, I don't know if you can see that or not. The fan is on. Sorry about that. Very carefully here. One of the very first editions of Richard Wright's Black Boy, which I pulled out for this very special occasion. So this particular book usually is encapsulated or enclosed. And I don't have it with me at this very moment, but something very similar to this. And so this is an example of polypropylene. Sorry about that. So it's uncoded, and you know, you can use things such as this for your photographs. You can temporarily store your books in them. In the case of a rare book in particular, what I like to do is cover it in archival. There are multiple ways to do this, but me personally at home, archival tissue paper, and then I also have some archival boxes. This is an example of a clamshell box, and you know, see, get it, clamshell. But you know, they're also like flat storage boxes, and they come in all different sizes. So, you know, if you have like a rare book like what I just showed you, you can actually put it in a box that is closer to the size of that box. And I also, in the photograph, showed how, you know, those particular cards were encased in, again, you know, it's something very similar to the this sheet protector that I just showed you, made of similar products. Polyethylene, which is a higher grade of, well, plastic that you can store, you know, your objects in. And again, this is like kind of like first step storage. So these are all encased. And there's more, but you know, that's the gist in terms of that. And so you can purchase, so this is really just, you know, sheet protectors, which is what I just showed you. And, you know, this particular box comes in a box of 100. And again, talking about and thinking about, you know, separating things and keeping them in a place where you can temporarily to permanently store. So these are not acid-free folders, but you can put your acid-free folders inside of these folders, and then later you can place them, or at that moment in this particular stage of storage, because again, we are thinking about meeting the need where it is. And so if you can, as I mentioned before, start with, purchasing supplies right away, and then moving it uh, into a, so if you can start with purchasing supplies right away, archival supplies, and that's great. But if not, then think in terms of what it is that you have in your possession on your way to permanent storage. And so this is one of those things. So the image that I showed you before with those boxes were clear. This in particular, these are black, and also these hanging folders here actually fit inside of these boxes, and you can then store them in, again, an environmentally sound space. And just to reiterate, no light or little to no light, non-fluctuating temperature, little dust collection. So you're providing like these additional layers of protection for these particular objects. And I know that a lot of the discussion or the focus, is on photographs and papers, documents. But again, so we looked at photographs, we looked at papers, the books. There are other, of course, paper documents you could be in possession of, again, an elder's birth certificate, and other records, things of that nature. And you can apply the same by storing them, again, in more like in supplies that will keep them from light, keep them from wetness, things of that nature. But then also, what else do we have? Right, we have music. And I pull this out in particular because this particular album jacket has really taken a beating. But again, there are archival, depending on how you feel about your music, the rareness of the particular object. Like, for example, we have this Marvin Gaye, as you know, this is the 50th year anniversary of this particular album, and this is one of the first cut albums. And it is currently not encased, and it's currently out, but we do play it. So this isn't what I would consider to be a part of like my collection, not as of yet. But if it were to become a part of the collection, then the same rules apply. And the other thing, again, is if you do have records and albums, try not to have them facing the windows, because the sunlight often comes into the windows. Try to keep them like in a darker space. And depending on where you live, they could be exposed to heat, which we know warps albums. So just begin to think about things of think in terms of like, what would be some of the better practices to store these materials in. And then I know that we're coming to a close, and I wanted to share this one last thing with you, which is my mom's high school yearbook. And again, so just I'm pulling all of these examples and things for you, because I want you to think about all of the things that are in your possession that draw meaning to you, like personal meaning that pulls in like the nostalgia and the importance, and the stories and the connections that you have to the people who made you, or to the people one way or the other, whether they gave birth to you or whether they just grew you into the person who you currently are, or the experiences that you have. Not maybe it may not even be directly related to the people, but the objects, the things. What are they? Why are they important? And then it'll help other people to understand why it is that they are important. And also it'll help to draw the connections between us, and show our similarities, show how our stories in some cases overlap, and, I don't know about you, but I love when I'm able to connect with people who I meet, by learning about, just that familiarity, like talking to people and learning about where their people are from, and, or how they got to where they are. And then before you know it, you realize that there's so many similarities between us. A lot of our stories overlap. Again, a lot of our families were a part of the Great Migration from the South to the North, different, states throughout the South, coming to the North. People love to say here in Chicago, we're just the South and the North, Mississippi folks, a lot of us, still carry a lot of, those behaviors, quite friendly, quite talkative, will invite you in for a meal, all of those wonderful things. All those stories are stored in our objects, So I think, I have covered everything that I've intended to cover with you this morning. I hope, again, that this is all very useful information. I look forward to being in further conversation. And again, thank you for this opportunity. And I wish you all the best, and with so much love and with so much care. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for Workshop 5 of The Black Family, United by History, Restored by Storytelling. Special shout out to New York Life and our production team for bringing this project to life. Once again, we encourage you to watch the rest of the videos in this series to learn more about oral storytelling, genealogy, and familial archiving. Once you view all of the videos, you could receive a certificate as a family historian from ASALH. Be sure to subscribe to ASALH TV, ASALH's YouTube channel, and check out the YouTube description as well as the website for more information on this project.